This season so far, dead air and what it's covering for. The authority gradient that keeps the right voice silent at the worst possible moment. The joke that isn't one. And the deeper question underneath all three, the script each of us is already running, and how far back it was written. This week, Michael steps outside that thread, into a disaster at NASA, a hospital corridor, and the small, invisible way a corner gets cut so slowly that nobody involved ever notices they cut it. Here's Michael.
There's a drawer in my kitchen I stopped closing properly about 2 years ago. Just pushed it, not quite home, because I was always halfway to somewhere else. It doesn't stick anymore, it doesn't catch. I don't even see it as open now. I see it as closed because that's what closed has come to mean, in that drawer, for me anyway. I want to tell you about a much more serious version of the same drawer. On the 28th of January 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart 73 seconds after launch, and 7 people lost their lives. The cause, in the textbook version, is an O-ring, a rubber seal that failed in cold weather. Now that's true, but it's the least interesting part of the story because it makes it sound like a surprise. It wasn't. Engineers had seen the same damage to those same O-rings on previous flights, successful flights. The shuttle had gone up and come back and been taken apart, and the damage had been there on the paperwork, reviewed, discussed, and waved through. Not once, repeatedly. Nobody at NASA hid that data. That's the part people get wrong when they tell this story as a cover-up. What actually happened is worse in a quieter way. A sociologist named Diane Vaughan gave it a name years later. Normalisation of deviance. Every time the O-rings showed damage and the flight still succeeded, the definition of an acceptable flight quietly moved. The damage stopped being a warning and started being data, expected, normal. By January the 28th, the engineers weren't ignoring a red flag. There wasn't a red flag left to see. It had been recalibrated out of existence, one successful flight at a time. That's the mechanism I want you to take from this, more than the tragedy itself. A rule doesn't usually get broken all at once. By someone deciding to break it, it gets bent slightly and nothing happens. And that non-happening isn't neutral. It's evidence, and the evidence says the bend was fine. So the next bend starts from the new position, not the old one. Do that enough times and you arrive somewhere you've never agreed to go directly, and you arrive there feeling like you haven't moved at all. You don't need a space shuttle for this. You need a checklist that gets skipped once because everyone's in a hurry and the flight, so to speak, still lands. You need a safety margin that gets shaved because the last 3 times it was fine. You need a standard that's quietly become what we actually do instead of what we say we do. And nobody signs off on that change because nobody had to. It happened one successful bend at a time, and every single person involved could, in good conscience, tell you they didn't cut a corner. By the time they were standing on it, it didn't look like a corner anymore. I've spent a good few years now in rooms full of clinicians working on quality and safety, and the same pattern turns up there with almost no adaptation required. Take the word, you hear it in American movies, stat, the label that's supposed to mean genuinely urgent. A clinician marks a routine scan as stat once to get a slow-moving patient seen faster. It works. Nobody's harmed. The patient's better off. And nothing about that single decision was reckless. Other clinicians notice it works and start doing the same for their own routine cases. Within a system, stat stops meaning urgent and starts meaning somebody wants this faster. And the genuinely urgent case loses the priority the label existed to protect them. Every individual choice was locally sensible. The drift is only visible from outside, all of them at once, which is exactly where nobody's standing when it happens. There's a quieter version of the same thing in how a diagnosis gets made. A doctor sees the first plausible explanation and, under pressure, stops generating alternatives. Doesn't run the fuller differential. Most of the time, this costs nothing because most patients do have the common thing. Do that enough times without consequence, and skipping the differential stops feeling like a shortcut and starts feeling like experience. The bend and the skill look, from the inside, like exactly the same thing. Now, I want to be honest about where this gets complicated, because it would be easy to leave you thinking every shortcut is a countdown to disaster, and that's not true either. It's not even useful. Plenty of rules are overcautious. Plenty of procedures exist because someone once was covering themselves rather than protecting anyone, and bending those is just good sense, not the first step towards Challenger. The engineers who waved through the O-ring damage weren't reckless people. They were making the same kind of judgment you make every day, using the same evidence. It worked before, it'll work again, and that judgment is usually right. That's what makes this hard. The mechanism that keeps you safe most of the time is the exact same mechanism that eventually might kill you. There's no separate faculty for normal, sensible adaptation and slow motion catastrophe. It's the same faculty, and you don't get a warning when it switches sides. So the question isn't, am I cutting corners? Everyone is all the time, and mostly that's fine. The question is, which corner you cut so long ago that you've stopped being able to see it as a corner at all. Not the recent one. Not the one you defend if you're asked about it right now. The old one. The one that's just how things are done.
That was Mind the Gap with Michael Comyn, Episode 6, Nobody Noticed the Bend. If today's episode had you thinking about what goes unsaid inside a system, the standard nobody rewrote out loud, but everyone quietly started reading differently, Michael's book, Between the Lines, is about exactly that gap. In conversation rather than checklists. Out now on Amazon.